Meet my new friend Paul. Originally from Scotland, Paul discovered a unique job opportunity in the Philippines, which led him to relocate. Now, 16 years later, he feels completely at home in Filipino society. More recently, Paul has ventured into stand-up comedy in the Philippines. Be sure to check out his Instagram for some clips, link below. In our conversation, Paul and I discussed his initial arrival in Manila, cultural differences between the UK and the Philippines, the role of OFWs in shaping the Filipino economy, and so much more. I hope you guys enjoy the video. You've been in the Philippines for a really long time, right?
Yeah, 16 years.
16 years. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
2009, I moved here.
2009. Yeah. So you are in the OG category.
Yeah.
Where are you from originally?
From the UK. I'm British. So there was a company I was working for in the UK that wanted to open an office in Asia in the online gambling industry, which the Philippines later became a real hub for. And they just said, look, would you like to move out? Or I kind of finessed it a little bit. It was initially supposed to be Singapore. And then they said that they couldn't do Singapore. They were looking for another location. They came back and said Manila, Philippines. And I was just like, yeah, okay, I'll go.
So did you spend the whole time since 2009 in Manila?
Yeah, in Manila. I mean, obviously I've traveled fairly extensively, but yeah, this has been my home since 2009. Like I was back in the UK last week, and like I feel like when the planes land in there, I feel like, okay, that's me, I'm on vacation. When the planes landed in Manila, I'm like, that's me, I'm back home. When I moved here, it was crazy. Back then, it was just the old Terminal 1, which was chaotic. When I landed in it, my first impression, to be honest, wasn't good. Went to use the bathroom, there was no toilet seat. Went out of the airport, and it was just a sea of people trying to hustle me. They just saw a white face, and everyone's just trying to rip you off. And then finally got in a taxi. The taxi driver wouldn't put the meter on, but he would show me a picture of his daughter if I was single. You know, just these extreme ridiculous things in this heat, and the skyway hadn't been built at the airport then. You were driving through kind of slum areas, and you know, initially my first impression was like I might have made a terrible mistake here. But as soon as the car started driving and it got into Rockwell, which was where I moved to and where I still stay today, so actually, do you know what? I think I have made the right decision, and I'm glad that I did. It was the best decision I ever made.
And what was the time frame between like when you first got there and you thought to yourself, "Oh, I might have made a mistake," and when you said, "Okay, you know what? I can get along with this. This is okay."
Less than an hour.
An hour.
The first impression anyone has of a country really is the airport. And I was landing at Terminal 1 in 2009, which had been consistently voted the worst airport in the world. And like I said, there wasn't the infrastructure, there wasn't the skyway there. So the first impression wasn't good. But as soon as I, kind of got closer to the area that I moved to, I was like, yeah, I've made the right decision.
And the Philippines obviously is the place that you've spent the most time, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what makes the Philippines different, like in comparison to maybe even other countries in Southeast Asia like Thailand?
The first big one is the language. The fact that it's an English-speaking country just makes all the difference. Now, there's a lot to be said to go into a place where people don't speak English, because you really feel the difference in culture there, and you have to learn and you have to adapt. But when you go to the Philippines and they speak English, it just makes it so much easier. So that would be the first big difference. The second, I guess, would just be the way of life here compared to say the West, for example. Like, you have maids here, you have drivers here, things that you just don't have back in the West. The population, how dense it is as well. Also how quickly it's grown since I've got here. Like I moved here at just the right time, and the growth I've seen has been absolutely phenomenal. Like when I first moved here, BGC there was a couple of big buildings there. There wasn't really that much. Now it's this huge sprawling metropolis. So it's the growth, like what I would say compared to the UK is, sadly, and I'm very proud to be British, but I believe that the UK is moving in the wrong direction. It's actually going backwards. Whereas the Philippines, in many ways, it feels like it's actually moving forwards. There's that trajectory and just that feel that, yeah, I'm in the right place, and this is a country that's going by and large, going in the right direction. Compared to places in Asia, I think Filipino are by far the nicest and friendliest people and welcoming compared to anywhere else in Asia.
Okay, I'll be honest. Learning to speak Tagalog is pretty hard, but with the right resources, it can be a whole lot easier. And I've got you covered with my beginner's Tagalog course. With 18 comprehensive video lessons, this 2-volume course makes it simple to start building your Tagalog skills from the ground up. Plus, you'll get lifetime access to PDF vocabulary sheets that will help you practice and retain what you learn. If that sounds good, click the first link in the description below to start learning Tagalog today. Now, back to the video. Now, of course, if you want to connect with any people, speaking their first language is usually the best way to do it, right? And especially Filipinos are very receptive to foreigners who try to learn some Tagalog or Bisaya or whatever language it might be. How has your experience been with that?
First of all, I've never learned it. I did try lessons when I first moved out here. It was like being back in high school, and it was like the textbook kind of classroom thing, and the words were so, I would look at them on the piece of paper and I was like, I've got no idea how to, at least if it's in French or Spanish, you can kind of read it, but some of the way it's written here, I was just, I've got no idea. So I just didn't put the time into it, and I never learned it. Now that I do stand-up comedy, looking back on it, I wish I had, because if I could perform stand-up in Tagalog, it would be a total game changer. But I have learned some words, like I've learned words that I need to know, and I've just for example, like in business here, there's a lot of times people just make excuses, like silly excuses. So if I just reply quickly with walang palusot, it lets me know that, lets them know this guy's not going to tolerate any nonsense kind of thing. And then from doing comedy, I've learned other Tagalog words that I can just drop in that help me get the point across.
Yeah, like after 16 years, you have to learn something, I'm sure, just from living there and interacting with people. Like some
I've
things
got
will
a bunch
stick.
of words. Yeah, most of the bad ones.
Right. Well, I mean, you said that, it would have been nice if you would have learned Tagalog for your stand-up now. I mean, it's not too late. You can still learn it if you'd like to now.
What I would like to do is like the whole language and being able to, read and write fluently Tagalog. At my age, I'm kind of old, turning 44. I don't think it's realistic. What I would like to learn is a very basic, you could call it conversational, but like conversational comedy Tagalog. So, these are the kind of words and phrases and things like that. And that's what I would really like to learn.
And so that's the advantage that you have, is that I'm sure there's a lot of English use around you, but even with Tagalog, you don't even have to throw in that many Tagalog words to like join in a conversation. Like so many Taglish sentences that I've heard, especially in those regions, are like 80% English, and then they just put like po in there every once in a while.
Like I just learned, like salamat, and people are like, oh sir, you speak Tagalog. Like it doesn't take a lot to impress people here.
Yeah, that's true. You say like one word and they're like, oh, you're amazing. Yeah. It's like, well, I haven't said anything yet, you don't know. You mentioned that you're doing stand-up comedy. When did you get started with that?
I started that last year.
So you started doing that in the Philippines?
Started doing it in the Philippines, yeah. I was just at home one day and it came up on, Netflix is the home of stand-up now, and it just came up on Netflix original, Mabuhay is a Lie. And as soon as I saw the word Mabuhay, I knew that's a Filipino word. And then from there, checked that comedian's profile and then the crew that he was a part of, and went to one of their open mics and started that way. And yeah, that's me.
Is stand-up becoming a pretty popular thing in the Philippines? What's the scene like right now?
The scene is growing. The English scene, there's not much. So I know you interviewed Patrick. So my crew, myself, Patrick and Nick, we're the Comedy Exiles. We're the only English speaking crew where all our performances are all in English. Well, we see a lot of potential there in the future for that to grow. But yeah, the comedy scene had been growing. It recently got its second Netflix special, a comedian called Alice Kleja, which is special. Again, it's in Tagalog, so I have to watch it with subtitles, but it's really good and moving in the right direction. But yeah, it's definitely a different place to do comedy here than back in like, the US or the UK or Canada.
So you've been doing it a year, and how's
it going? Not quite a year, but just under a year. But yeah, it's overall it's going well. Like I said, doing my own thing now with Patrick and Nick, and yeah, it's going really well. And
the Comedy Exiles is the group that you guys started, right?
Correct. That's the group that we started. Comedy Exiles kind of got exiled from the existing crew, so started our own thing, and it's just focused on English speaking comedy.
Is it an open mic that you guys do, or do you guys have designated spots?
Yeah, we have an open mic. We do it every Thursday in a hostel called Mad Monkey, which is in Poblacion. Poblacion's like an area where a lot of people or younger people go out for drinks. There's a lot of cool bars there and stuff like that. So we do it at Mad Monkey. It's always a full house. Crowd differs every week, obviously, because it is a hostel and it's very, very international. So we have that open mic, which is doing really well, and then we have a few shows that are just in the works that are going to start coming out fairly soon.
Wow, that's cool. So it's an international crowd basically every time.
Yeah, international crowd, but also some Filipinos as well. And a lot of the comedians are Filipino, but again, just performing in English.
But like better or worse, every country has its own sense of humor, right? It's kind of whatever you align with, whatever you identify with. So when you're looking at a room full of international people, you maybe have some Canadians there, some Filipinos, some Brits, some Australians. How do you gear your jokes so that everyone understands them or likes them, or is that even possible?
it's tough. It's certainly a very tough place to do it. When I started, of course, I was performing in English, but the crowds that I would be performing to would be a mix of locals and Filipinos, foreigners and Filipinos, but it would be foreigners that actually live here. So if I'm talking about something pertaining to the Philippines, the foreigners actually understand it because they live here. Whereas when you're performing at Mad Monkey, these are, backpackers that are maybe in the Philippines or Manila for 2 days. So any cultural reference, they won't get it. So yeah, it makes it more difficult, but I think that's a good thing because it challenges you to be able to adapt what you're saying to different crowds, and you just have to try and balance it as best you can.
Part of interacting with the Filipino community here in Canada has been learning the language, but also like through that learning the sense of humor. And I don't think you necessarily need the language for that to translate anyway. I think that Filipinos just have a very specific sense of humor that I've really related to. Like it's very like sarcastic, kind of cutting, kind of a lot of like riffing, maybe kind of poking fun.
I mean, in terms of the comedy scene here, it's historically largely been run by the gay and transgender community, and a lot of it's what's known as insult comedy. So, for example, the biggest comedy club here by far is Vice, which is Vice Ganda's comedy club, and Vice Ganda would arguably be the biggest celebrity in the entire country. So that historically has been the type of comedy. Like it will be like, for example, like 3 kind of like drag queens on stage, and they're making jokes at the crowd, kind of offending them. They call it insult humor. That's the original version of stand-up, I guess you could say, here, but you're now starting to get that kind of POV style, observational, more international style of stand-up comedy.
That's interesting. Yeah, like back in the day when I was first learning Tagalog, I watched a lot of Vice Ganda to like learn words and stuff like that. My girlfriend at the time really enjoyed it, and so I watched tons of episodes of that. And yeah, like that show is very much based in comedy, right? Even the interviews, there's always kind of an element of
laugh track
joking around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in front of a live audience, is it not?
It is, yeah. These types of shows in the Philippines are immensely popular.
But yeah, anyway, I'm just thinking that the Filipino sense of humor I enjoy it. Sometimes maybe even a little bit more than the Canadian sense of humor, just because it's different, it's fun, and I just love the sarcasm of it, I think. You can be a little bit more direct with people. You can say, hey, man, you don't look good today. Kind of look like crap, or maybe you've gained some weight. And in Canada, we wouldn't be able to get away with that. People just don't talk like that. At the same time, there are other topics that for Canadians, we might think they're okay, but then for Filipinos, they're not. And so I've sometimes had a hard time balancing like where is the line, I guess, on what's okay to talk about and what's not okay, like culturally speaking.
The one that really differs in the Philippines is weight. Like Filipinos will, like, you come back from vacation, they'll be like, oh, you must have had a good trip, you got fat. When it comes to weight, they will always call that out, which of course we typically don't do in the West. Other than that, they'll ask questions like, oh, how much money do you make, or how much is your apartment, or like just straight up, like, how much did you pay for that? And we would never really talk about these things. So they would be the two. But other than that, I think
relationships too, though. Like, you have a girlfriend, how
long
have you been together?
Well, that's the other thing is, like, especially when you're a white guy here, it's always, sir, do you have a Filipino asawa? They're always asking about that, personal questions. It's not as politically correct, right? Like, I had a friend who was it was like a Zoom call, and there was people there's people on the call from like the US, UK, Canada, and then there's the guys from the Philippines, and he used to live here, and the Filipino guy from their office that was on the call is like, oh, you have a Filipino girl, you have a Filipino wife, and the Americans and Canadians and British people that were on the call from like HR, they were like, oh my God, I can't believe he would ask you that question on a work call kind of thing. And it's just like, no, that's just the way it is. And to be honest, I think it's far, far better in the Philippines because political correctness hasn't really taken off here, whereas in the West, America's kind of turning the other way a little bit, but it's very politically correct, and in the Philippines they don't have that level of political correctness, which I think is much, much better.
Yeah, you can be a little bit more free to say what you want around people and blur the lines between, am I joking about this, or am I actually kind of saying something that could be seen as offensive? And yeah, it gives you a little bit more freedom. But yeah, I've also crossed the line with people, I think, just kind of in like my own ignorance, like not knowing where the line is, and I've said something to a Filipino coworker or something, and then they react poorly.
Filipinos, from my experience, are the most sensitive and emotional people in the world that I've ever dealt with and everywhere I go. So you don't have to be politically correct and you can joke about different things, but if they're the butt of the joke, they don't like it. And the worst thing, the absolute worst thing you can do to a Filipino as a foreigner is make them lose face in public. So if, like, for example, you're in a work set and there's a Filipino there and the Filipino's the butt of the joke, or, you know, you say anything that could be negative, critical of them in a public setting, then that's really, really, really bad for them. So, like, for example, in business, if I have a Filipino employee and I have to, you know, speak to them or kind of warn them or whatever, I would always take them into a room and do it one-on-one, because if you criticize them openly, like on the, you know, on the office floor when other people are there, it destroys them because they've lost face, not just in the Philippines, in Asia throughout. The worst thing you can do is make people, you know, lose face in public. And that applies at all levels of Philippine society, from the highest to the lowest.
How do you feel like within yourself culturally after being in the Philippines for so many years? Like, do you feel like you're taking on some of these Filipino cultural norms after 16 years? Are you still very British? Are you a combination
I'm very British,
of
I haven't changed at all. Just 100% British.
In terms of getting along with other people then, is there conflict? Is there tension? Or are you able to operate in that space between the two cultures?
Again, but by and large, Filipino people are the nicest, friendliest people in the world. So overall, I would say no. Sadly, there have been a couple of instances, but that's really just been in the comedy scene, and that there's different reasons as to why. But other than that, no, I'm just always myself, and Filipino people are really nice and really friendly. And again, we're all westernized, we're all English speaking, and there's never been any problems. I don't think I've really adopted any Filipino traits, none that I can think of. I've always just kind of stayed the same.
From the beginning, like since 2009, you've been in Manila, but you've done some trips around the Philippines. Do you have any like favorite spots that you've been to?
My favorite spot in the Philippines is Amanpulo. That's the jewel in the crown here. It's like a private island from the Aman group. So yeah, that's the nicest place here. That's where all the kind of like big celebrities will go, because it's like a private island, whether it's Jay-Z and Beyonce or Brad Pitt or Madonna or whoever, like they all go to Amanpulo because they get peace and quiet. That would be my favorite place. My second favorite place would be Boracay. Boracay is a place, I was just there for New Year. It's a place that I always go back to. It's one of my favorite places in the entire world. It's just a magical island, so I love Boracay. But I've been in, you know, Cebu multiple times, been down in Davao, been all over the country and seen good and bad. There was in 2013, there was the worst ever typhoon in recorded human history in Tacloban. Caused total devastation. It destroyed an entire area. And I went down there. Well, I actually took a family in to live with me, but there were some boys to live with me who had been displaced by it. And then I built them a house down there so they could, you know, be reunited and have the family and go to school, which they'd been deprived of. So spending time down there in a real province after that destruction, that's when I really saw, you know, the most extreme of the other side. But even then, the harrowing events that these people had gone through, first of all, they were incredibly resilient, but they were also incredibly resourceful, and they just made the most of it. And just that strength of character was what really resonated with me the most.
Yeah, that's like a common theme that I hear from people who are in the Philippines or have a connection to the culture. The resilience of the Filipino people. Like, it's pretty hard to shake them.
Yeah, no matter what they go through, they always stay strong, and they have that sense of community as well, where it's just like, okay, like that typhoon, for example, okay, a terrible thing's happened, we'll dust ourselves off and we'll come back from it. Incredible resilience that we don't have in the Western world.
Absolutely. My first connection to the Philippines was when I was about 17, 18, and I was working at a grocery store here in Canada, and I met some Filipino people there, like my coworkers and stuff. I noticed that like those kind of what we would call a dead-end job can attract a certain type of person in Canada that really kind of hates their life a little bit. Maybe it doesn't attract them, but maybe people, they end up there and they're just like, I hate going to work
just
every day.
Going through the motions,
Yeah, they're kind of down. I would work with Filipino people that were working the same shift as everybody else, like a full-time job. And then after work, they were going to a different job and starting another shift over there. And they were never upset. They were never complaining about their day or their workload. They were happier than everyone else, and a lot of times working twice the hours.
100%. And that group of Filipinos that you just described, they, for me, they're my favorite Filipinos, if you will. They're the people that I think are the best representation of this country, and that's the OFWs. The Philippines' #1 export is people. They export over 15 million people abroad in North America, like you said, in Canada and the US. The Middle East, if you go to Dubai or Saudi Arabia or any of these places, it's always, 7% of the population of the UAE is Filipino. And if it's any roles that are facing the public, like, working in hospitality, for example, or retail, it's always Filipinos. And I don't think there's anyone better in the world than Filipinos, because like you said, if you're working a job at a supermarket or a store or whatever back home, like, people are just like, yeah, whatever, like, they don't really care. Filipinos actually take a pride in it. They're grateful for the job and they work really hard and they have a really positive attitude. And of course, they're working hard so that they can send money back home to their family, which I have the greatest respect for. And the OFWs, the sacrifice they make by working abroad and sending that money back, that money has done so much for this country. Like, the development of the Philippines is based primarily on two things: OFWs and BPOs. They love acronyms. OFWs, obviously, the Overseas Filipino Workers, for those that don't know, and BPOs, Business Process Outsourcing, which are the call centers. And OFWs, they really don't get the credit that they deserve, I feel. So whenever I'm in Dubai, just for example, first of all, I can always tell they're a Filipino by the name tag. If they've got like a wacky name like Princess or Bamba or whatever the name is, I say, oh, whereabouts in the Philippines are you from? Sir, how did you know I'm Filipino? It's like, I can tell by your name tag. And one thing I always do is I just take time to talk, where's your province? How often do you go back? And it kind of like, thank you for your service, just to let them know that you are appreciated. But that attitude towards work that you see from the OFWs, you also see that in the BPOs. There's a reason the Philippines is the call center capital of the world now, because if you have a call center in US, UK, Canada, it might be students or people that are working, they don't really want to do the job. They're just going through the motions, like, yeah, whatever. Whereas when the call center started coming to the Philippines at the turn of the 21st century, these Filipinos, like, they're working really hard. Like, they take a pride in what they're doing. They're actually committed to the job. They've got families to feed, and the talent of the workforce here is just so much better. People talk about, the outsourced jobs to the Philippines because it's cheaper. Yeah, of course, that's is a massive part of it. It's way cheaper to have these jobs here, but it's not just the cost, it's also the quality. The quality of the Filipino workers is way better than the UK or the US or Canada when it does come to call centers. And a lot of Filipinos, if they were in training for call centers, they'll watch like episodes of Friends just to sound even more American and be more neutralized. And that work ethic from the OFWs and from the BPOs is what has by and large built this country in the 21st century. And the Filipinos, they're just amazing workers. And not just that, but even more than that, is they are a real net positive to whatever country they're in.